Now it's Friday, just before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I want to tell you about what has been happening since early evening yesterday. Well, things started going seriously wrong last night. Judas, together with a band of soldiers, came to arrest Jesus in the garden known as the Garden of Gethsemane. I'm ashamed to admit that when it came to the crunch, all of us except Peter and John were focused on saving our skin. And even Peter and John only held out for a while before they also kept their distance. By the time dawn arrived, Peter was experiencing some sort of a meltdown. We heard rumors that he had denied knowing Jesus 3 times. And that's not all. He threw in some curses and probably some foul language, apparently. And even John ran away. Well, I hope you won't judge us. It's only in the moment when we are faced with imminent danger that we know how we will react. I guess we're all pretty similar. The next thing we knew, at about 9 o'clock this morning, Jesus was carrying a cross through the streets of Jerusalem. Everyone could see that he had been beaten, scourged mercilessly, and no doubt he had been mocked and tortured. It was almost impossible to recognize him. Apart from being horrified at his appearance, we were dismayed at how our expectations had been so completely dashed. Here was the poor, bloodied, bedraggled man we thought of as our Messiah. But that's not the end of it. By midday, Jesus was hanging on that cross. He looked so feeble, defeated, pathetic in his misery. Some of us have sneaked back to this awful scene, trying to be anonymous and to keep a bit of a distance between ourselves and the cross. Mostly we've been quiet, lost in our own thoughts, feeling pretty disillusioned. But probably all of us have running through our minds the traumatic events of the last 15 hours or so. And those thoughts and memories keep running around in our heads, and we can hardly understand what's happening before something else happens that's shocking. Last night in the garden, before Judas and the soldiers appeared, we couldn't keep awake. We were just so dead tired. And Jesus was praying and he was saying, "Father, if it is possible, take this cup of suffering away from me. But in the end, it's what you want that is important." Jesus was in obvious anguish. He was weeping and praying over and over, and we felt so bad that we weren't able to stay awake and offer him some sort of comfort or support. But to be honest, we didn't know how we could comfort or help him. We didn't really understand what he was thinking was going to happen. Eventually, there was a change, a subtle shift in the words that he spoke in his praying. "Father, if it is not possible that this cup be removed from me without my drinking it, then let it happen according to your will." That seemed to be a moment of surrender, of acceptance, and whatever it meant, Jesus was going to allow it to happen. It seemed that he knew by then that he had to die. But why? Why couldn't there be a different conclusion? Why couldn't there be a different way? This man is amazing. He has upset the authorities, not just because he challenged their authority, but also because he showed up their hypocrisy and their double standards and their lack of humanity. He is so full of compassion, and he helped us to feel loved and forgiven by God. Is this what the world does to really good people? Because the world is made to feel so uncomfortable by them? Does Jesus have to go through all of this and end his life on a cross between two criminals as though he has been cursed by God? As the minutes tick by, so slowly that it feels as though time has stopped in its tracks, we wonder why all this has happened. There are political reasons, obviously. The Pharisees were justified in their concern on Sunday, I suppose. There was such a commotion as we all entered Jerusalem, and people were hailing Jesus as king. And then, of course, there was the huge drama in the temple where Jesus left nothing to the imagination in the way in which he treated the money changers and those people selling animal sacrifices. All of us were rather startled by that performance. We had never seen Jesus so angry, and we'd never really seen him so physically violent as to overturn tables. We understood his unhappiness, but it's dangerous to mess with the system. There are spiritual reasons too, of course, because Jesus made it so clear that God is very different from the God the official religious teachers describe. We had thought that God was horrified by our sin because God is utterly pure and just, and that God would struggle to have anything to do with us. But now we know that first and foremost, God is filled with love and compassion. He doesn't want to condemn and judge. And we've seen God's compassion at work in Jesus. Every day when we've been with him, we've seen how gracious he is towards people, so that they walk away from an encounter with Jesus changed, their heavy loads lightened, their lives a little easier. Somehow poor broken people seem to be able to walk away from him upright, their heads held high. They seem to have a new confidence, let alone the healing that some of them experienced. Jesus was so relaxed in the presence of people we had always been taught to shun. People who are obviously sinners, tax collectors and prostitutes and people like that. In fact, it seemed very often that Jesus was seeking out people who were sick or demonized, and people who were without hope, and people who were unclean. So, however tragic this end might be, our view of God has been changed forever. Of course, we were still hoping that God would intervene in some dramatic way and would rescue Jesus. At dinner last night, when Jesus took a bowl of water and a towel and washed and dried our feet, and later when he called us his friends, what did all of this mean? Was Jesus trying to tell us that God is not some high and mighty being who dwells in unapproachable power and light, and that God would never get his hands dirty, when we had always been led to think that God was transcendent, was remote, was all-powerful, was robed in light? Is it possible that God, creator of heaven and earth, could be ready to serve us, to show us his love? What does all of this mean? And we are supposed to show that we love each other by doing the same. But literally speaking, what would it mean for me to wash your feet, or for you to wash my feet? Will we all be different after today? Or will we just go home and resume our old lives, do what we used to do before we met this man? But that all seems a lifetime ago, and I have to admit it all seems so boring now. We need some space to work it all out. We are thoroughly disillusioned to see how political and religious leaders will do what is expedient, how ruthlessly they will deal with anyone and anything that gets in the way of their own purpose or ambition. Behind their facades there is so much evil. They are devious and scheming and corrupt. How can things change? Here is God's messenger, God's Son, the one we thought was the Messiah, a man who clearly was so full of zeal and passion for God's kingdom, a man who worked tirelessly to make people's lives better, to make people happier, to give people hope. And they're prepared to send him to an early grave after terrible injustice and torture, just to clear the way for their evil purposes. It is too much for us to understand. Is the way of the world always violent and vicious and malicious? Would we be treated in the same way if we lived and spoke like Jesus did? But it's not just the leaders. The crowds that lined the streets outside Jerusalem shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David," became a hysterical mob baying for the blood of an innocent man. When it comes to the crunch, ordinary people can be thoroughly cruel and devious too. What did they hope to gain by Jesus' death? We are sickened by how fickle they are. Mind you, we haven't exactly been a shining example of faithfulness and integrity, and we do still feel bad inside. We are reluctant to think about this, but each of us is disappointed in himself. We had hoped that being part of a great cause would turn us into little heroes. Here we are, a motley crew of failed followers, embarrassed by our obsession with our own safety. What would it take to really transform us? It has grown strangely dark now, even though it's only mid-afternoon. In the darkness we can hear from far away Jesus saying, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing." Forgive who? Forgive us? If only we could feel forgiven. If only we knew Jesus was forgiving us. We haven't exactly been great friends and faithful disciples. We don't deserve it. The worst thing is that we failed Jesus when he must have really needed us. We think back to the garden last night, when Jesus prayed that there might be another way. Maybe there wasn't another way, to show that God is prepared to suffer for us because of his love. How incredible that God should make himself vulnerable, coming to us as one of us, and now dying on that cross. And before Jesus came, God had seemed so far away. Maybe we don't need a warrior king, a military hero. Maybe this is the only thing that can change the world. All of us, as imperfect as we are, trying to allow God to change us so that we are more like Jesus, living lives of love and service and sacrifice. Maybe that's the point of this horrible death. If there are enough of us, maybe everything can change. God, you have shown us your face in the most extraordinary way. You have shown us your love so powerfully. We weep to see what the world has done to Jesus. We weep too because of our sense of our own failure, a feeling of brokenness. We also are so upset by what has happened because we know how Jesus and you were so close. And although we can't understand why you let this happen, if Jesus is dying there on the cross, then your heart must be broken too. We weep because of how we have behaved. We should have been stronger. We should have been braver. We should have been more resolute. We should have been more courageous. Forgive us, Lord. And if it is possible, help us not to let the flame that Jesus lit in our hearts die. That would be the worst thing of all, if Jesus died and nothing ever came of what he's done over the last 3 years. We want to be part of something new. Give us another chance, Lord. Maybe next time we won't fail. God, we have been so inspired. We love this man so much. Don't let it all die with him on the cross. It seems so final. Can you find a way to help what he started to continue? Can we be part of it, as weak as we are? You haven't given up on the world, have you, God? You haven't given up on us, have you, God? If we work together, you and us, then maybe we can change the world.